I run my company virtually from the home, so I can speak for a lot of things, that we do indeed live in a technological world. If it weren't for the computer, if it weren't for the internet, I wouldn't be at school. I met Dr. Davis in a psychology class, and I'm the most verbose student. I know. I apologize, sir. Not being the brightest crayon in the box, what I'd like to do is refer back to Webster's as to what they say technology is all about. It's the practical application of knowledge, especially in a particular area. It does not have to be electronic. It does not have to be the internet. It does not have to be anything. What I'd like you to do is imagine back in the late 1901s, two brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, are going to create an airplane. And there's this guy a couple years before by the name of Glenn Curtis, and he wanted to participate with the Wright brothers because he built motorcycle engines, and his engines were far superior to that of the Wright brothers. But the Wright brothers' design, as far as efficiency and coefficient of drag, was a purer machine today than what the Europeans were developing. The Wright brothers turned Mr. Curtis down, and he went to Europe. Because his engine was better, the technology took the turn of putting the engine in the nose with the propeller in the front, where 60% of the thrust is thrown back against the radiator and it is lost to inefficiencies. But because the engine was far superior to the Wright brothers, we went away from the original purity of the design with the canard to where we are just coming back today with the advent. The Russians were the first to use it in their MiG-29, Foxbat, MiG-31, the YF-22. We're coming back to canard technology today. So it's interesting because one person had one part of technology that was better than the other. Technology took a turn away from the purity of where it could have gone. I talked to a pilot one time and he said, if you put enough horsepower on a refrigerator, you can get it going pretty fast. But it's not pure. I'd like to remind you of one other thing before I turn this over to this esteemed panel. I'm the only one here who makes a living, I believe, through the free enterprise system through our software. It is an amazing thing. A small startup company, I can compete with the biggest and the smallest and the best and the worst, and we are what we are, and technology alone allows us to do that. We are competing in a very competitive market, and I'm very proud to say that our first year's sales will exceed $100 million. We have been very, very blessed, and it is only because of the technology and hiring the brightest people that you can find, and in my case, that's everyone, to surround yourself with that intelligence. That in itself is technology. I close by this last statement. Henry Ford was a guy who had an idea, and he didn't give up on it, but he failed a few times along the way. The first time he started a motor car company, he had to sell it to the Cadillac brothers, and Cadillac Motors took over. The second time he went into business, he had some guys by the name of the Dodge brothers, and the Dodge brothers provided the parts for Ford. And the third time, he got it right. And the one thing that I will say about technology, and I agree with everyone up here, technology is neither good or bad. It is what we do with the technology. And as our culture is invading other cultures, as our technology is invading those people who don't have technology, what we have to be most concerned about, that we give their culture and their people time to decide what it is they want to do before we force ourselves on other people. Henry Ford's technology changed the world. It changed the world because it took away the individual creativity of the worker. Up until assembly line, a man or a woman was they put their name on their work. They built it from scratch. They completed it. They birthed it. And now someone just puts on a lug nut on a wheel. What Henry Ford did was he impersonalized work. And the thing that the internet allows us to do today is to repersonalize our work and put our name and our brand on our product. Thanks.
I don't think I have any. Yeah, I do. Now it's time for questions. Panelists are here, and the floor is open for our audience to ask questions from panelists. Just, you can.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is, a month ago I watched on C-SPAN the president of George Washington University speak about how technology has not had a major effect in transforming education. And what he was saying was that if you went 100 years ago and went to a Ford plant, you would see people working in a certain way. And if you took that guy working in that plant and took him to Ford today, he would see a totally different plant. He wouldn't even know where he was almost, because technology has transformed that industry. Yet, if you take a student or a teacher 100 years ago and you place him into Palomar College today, he or she should be able to figure out what's going on. There'll be students at a desk, and there will be a teacher in front teaching. And so, going from here, where do you see technology transforming, or if it will transform, education?
Any of our panelists?
Sure.
Please, Mr. Morrow.
Well, I'll be happy to tackle at least a part of that. At least one of the ways that things are changing, well, with the technology that we're using, is we're giving tools to make it possible for diversity of learning and learning styles to make it possible for teachers to address those different ways of interacting. As an example, one of the projects that I run provides a virtual classroom. It is an online classroom, but it is a synchronous online classroom. So you've got a live teacher talking to live students, talking. So there's social presence. You don't have the sense that I'm not there. I am there. My students are there. We're able to use at least the audio means and captioning, of course, and Sherry's helped me a lot with development of many of the things that we use to make sure that we're truly accessible to most of the students. But we've also got a whiteboard, which can serve as a chalkboard, which could have played anything that Haydn played, for example, with his presentation. You could have heard it, played the media. You've got note-taking. We've got other areas there that make it possible for me to load files up to students. I can give them to you in real time. We've got a chat area so students can, we've got breakout rooms so that students can go work in groups, come back, and communicate. The real key to that virtual classroom is learning the tools that make it an effective teaching tool and an effective learning environment. It is, I believe anyway, one of the more effective ways for us to reach students of with all kinds of needs and without imposing barriers that are artificial and sometimes, actually are inherent to a face-to-face environment. On the internet, as the New Yorker cartoon said many, many years ago, nobody knows you're a dog. In a face-to-face classroom, we know.
If I may.
Really, please, Dr.
What surprises me sometimes is that, we forget that all these geniuses who've invented all this technology have actually come up through the traditional education system. So something appears to have worked there rather well. So I do not quite understand what the rush is to try to throw all this technology at the educational system, because so far I can't see that that has been doing any good. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. I also disagree with the notion that technology is neutral. I, for one, do not think that it is. And it's not just Germans who think that, by the way. Marshall McLuhan, the famous American media critic, has sort of this iconic saying, the medium is the message. Neil Postman, another famous American prophet, has also said that once a technology is introduced into society, it plays out its hand. Technologies have inherent biases. The TV as a technology has an inherent bias. It has shifted the American political system, for example. It has changed the way which we communicate. We're right now in the run-up to a presidential election. You notice how TV has shifted the whole emphasis of political debate much more to appearance and semblance and soundbite, to the quick fix rather than to sustained discussion and so on and so forth. I'm afraid actually that an online world has an inherent bias in similar ways. For example, an online environment doesn't encourage reading. Nobody reads very long texts online. When people get a very long letter, they're happy. when they get a very long email, they're annoyed. You know? I mean, technologies do have inbuilt biases. They're not neutral. You know, and when we introduce them, we often do so not actually quite knowing yet what exact effect that will have. I think we're exactly in that stage actually with the computers and online environment. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to those technologies, I'm an avid user of them. I just do think that it's worth thinking about when the use of what technology is actually appropriate and when it's not. And I do think that the wide scale adoption of computers and online education, they all have their space. I'm just very wary of the widespread introduction of all of them without having really worked many of these issues out yet.
Japtok, please.
First of all, I think the gentleman's comment was very appropriate. The education is very, very slow to change. One of the comments was that, you know, the overhead was in the bowling alley 30 years before it was in the classroom. And so I think I think you're right. I think that the traditional lecture-based mode of delivering instruction is very teacher-centric. And yeah, going back hundreds of years, it wouldn't be a whole lot different today. I do disagree with Martin quite a bit, though. There's a whole series of studies that have been done called the No Significant Difference, and what it looked at was the mode of instruction. And it found that there was no significant difference in terms of learning outcomes based on the mode of instruction. It all really boils down to the instructor having to figure out the learning objectives and figuring out how to package those in a way that is consistent with the student's learning ability. And that is done online. In fact, a lot of people have observed that the discussion online is far superior to the discussion that occurs in the classroom, because online, when you're posting a message, students have a chance to think about it, they have a chance to write a draft if they want, and then post it. Whereas when you raise your hand in class, it's sort of off the top of your head. So in my experience, the online discussions often are much more thoughtful and sustained and impressive than the ones that occur in the classroom. I do agree that technology, I think technology is neutral. I think it really, as others have said, how you use it and using it intelligently definitely has a place in our education system.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. We have 2 questions. Laura has the microphone. She's coming to you. It's like...
Is it on?
Yes.
It's on. Okay, this doesn't really have to do with education, but we know that hackers can bring down businesses. We know that the monetary system can just have a hacker come in there and destroy things. NASA's computer has been violated, the government computers have been violated, and viruses go around and everybody really worries a lot. So in terms of is it our friend or not, in that way, the whole world is working on computers and somebody could bring the whole thing down. This doesn't make me feel happy or relaxed or comfortable, and that's the downside of it, and I think you can start a world war with this kind of stuff. That's not good. On the upside, I know that there are some programs where amateur astronomers from around the planet get together to pool their data to find out how to map a sky. You're shaking your head because you know better than I do what I'm trying to say. And the chance to come together in terms of sharing information, as part of your video said, is unprecedented. And the impact of images is huge. Any one image that's worth 1,000 words, if you're going to put it into video and send it out on the planet, it would be nice if a Messiah would come now and, you know, be hooked up. But the ones we know about didn't really have good media coverage. How can anyone in any business who is on a computer connection to the planet protect him or herself? And I just read a couple of weeks ago that the internet is about to be replaced by something else. Then maybe you can talk about that.
As a client, I would tell you that your data is very safe. If I was talking to you on a panel, I would say that there's a real risk. The way we protect our clients' data is pretty unique, and we would like to think we're hacker-proof. So I'm not going to talk about our proprietary software and our security. It's 50% of our budget. You have to outweigh the good with the bad, and you have to take an analytical risk. Oh, I hate to say this, but when GM had the side saddle tanks in the cars, and they were weighing the mathematical probability of, do you shut the line down and retool the car, or do you take the guess that someone's going to get hit and you're going to get sued? And it was actually cheaper to do the worst thing, and that was to wait for somebody to get hit. Internet security is a lot the same way, at least in the business world. You take a look, you look at your mathematical chances, you analyze it, and you say, is it worth the expense, or are we going to slip under the radar? Repeat the question or the statement.
You repeat. They can't.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, the question is that they've hacked a government system. And this is not a chide at government, but I'd like to address the group and say, what one thing does government do efficiently?
Collect taxes.
The data that has been stolen from the banks has been through the Fed. It hasn't been through private enterprise. The data that was stolen from Bank of America was due to a computer being stolen, not through a hacker. And so I think you'll find if you look very carefully, industry has its act together for the most part. We don't, and I don't speak for the industry, but ours we do. I really believe that.
We have another question back there. Please, go ahead.
Okay, I read a book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, which sounds a little strange, but it was all about what was happening to the brain as different technologies came in down through history when it came to the alphabet and what happened with the brain development. I want to know if there are studies being done about what is happening with computers and brains, because we have a lot of young people on computers a lot, and I notice a detachment in the students that I work with. They get online, they get on a computer, and they detach because they become part of the computer almost. In the book, Alphabet versus the Goddess, at the end he says, because a computer works with right and left brain, with the eyes and with the ears, that it will develop a more balanced brain. Can anybody speak to that that's on the panel?
Part of it? Only this part, that it certainly is true that one of the things we have to learn as instructors is that we can impose burdens when we combine auditory, when we present content without an awareness of how much brain function is required to translate that content. For example, if I throw a picture at you and you're a student and I impose a good deal of text along with that picture, I'm asking your visual senses to do two different things, interpret the picture and interpret the text. And I'm actually imposing a burden on you as a learner, which would be relieved somewhat if I threw the picture at you and used audio, in other words, described by voice, what the picture represented. So we have to be aware as instructors, it's simply educational principles, but also just the principles of learning. We have to be aware as instructors of how we're presenting content in a way that makes it possible for the learner to absorb it and to really get the message. That's just a part.
Also, there has been studies with older people with Alzheimer's and how using things like, I'm a 15-year-old gamer myself, so using machines like the Wii, stimulating the brain, doing things like that has helped with diseases like Alzheimer's. So any kind of stimulation of the brain is good. No, gaming, if you, I know some people say, well, they spend hours and hours in gaming. But it's interesting what some of these games are doing now. That there's a game called Fable, for instance, that gives you moral consequences to your actions in the game. If you go down one path, you become an evil person. If you go down another path, you become a good person. And it also stimulates your, I think, your right and left brain also, because you're doing your problem solving, and there's so many things, little things that games can do if you don't get addicted to it. And what you do, sometimes you get 5 to 6 hours in a game, you say, okay, I have to quit. But still, I think the upside is, like, I'm the one that says all technology is good, because it's not knowledge, volition, and action. Our will, what is our will to do something? And morally, how can we attach that will to the moral aspects of what we're doing? And so, for me, all technology is good. It depends on your decision, the human being's decision to use that technology for the good of mankind.
You know, one of the connections I had with that was I see students all the time doing like 5 different things. They're reading and they're listening, you know, got the earbuds in, and they're, you know, maybe IMing with friends. They're doing like 4 or 5 different things. And there was a study that came out not too long ago on multitasking and on how effective and efficient that was. And it found that it really was not very efficient. And people were kind of fooling themselves that we really can concentrate well on one thing at a time. We can switch our attention back and forth very quickly. But the idea that you can do 4 or 5 things simultaneously and do them all well, I think is a myth. And, but, you know, tell any young person that, they're not going to believe you.
Any of our panelists has any more comment?
I think this will relate for you to the question anyway. I see it when I see a student that struggles with printed material. And then we put the computer with auditory output and tracking that goes across the screen. Now they're using their visual skills and their auditory skills to be able to read the text that before, by the time they finished the first paragraph, they forgot what they read. Now it's making more sense to them. So something is happening in that brain for them that they can now do those tasks that they couldn't do before.
Thank you. I think there is another question back here, please. We go there too.
Sorry. My question is on technology and its effect on diversity, and it is, oh, I should stand up, okay. And it is, the internet is probably the biggest impact in the last 30 years when it comes to technology on the world. It has really changed, I think, the way people interact. But when you use it as a media tool, a place to find your information, people have more options. So there is maybe a tendency to people to only go to media sources that look like theirs. They have the belief that, you know, I'm going to go, and if I'm a conservative, I'm going to go get my message from conservatives. Or if I'm a liberal, I'm going to get my message from liberals. And so the used to be old model of having a centralized mass media that tried to remain as neutral as possible, doesn't that have an effect counter to diversity or counter to uniting and more having a divisive effect? That's my question.
Thank you.
Well, I know I have an iPhone in my pocket, and I can listen to BBC anytime I want to, and the BBC always has a different slant on things than the United States news does. Or if I wanted to go to Africa and listen to the African stations through the internet and the iPod being in my pocket, I can instantly go there and listen to this station in Africa, giving what their viewpoint on the rest of the world. And so I think in that aspect, having that technology in your pocket, it creates massive diversity, because it depends on what you want to do with it. If you only want to listen to one particular station that's a conservative station, that's your choice. That's your free will to do that. But if you really want to have the tools, and it's only been in the last 20 years or so that we've had that ability for humanity to go out and reach other people. You know, in the Vietnam War, in World War II, for instance, we didn't know much about the war. We had to get letters from it or hear about it on the radio or newsreels. But now you can turn on the television instantly and know what went on in Iraq, because we're that in touch. And if you don't believe that story, turn to the BBC, see what they have to say about it. And if you want to be more involved, go to another station in Africa or Egypt or someplace else that speaks English that you can understand the language. And I think with technology, my whole thing is like, especially being a Trekkie, I think somewhere we're going to get to universal translators, where we'll have this thing where you no longer really have to learn all these different languages. You'll have this, you'll switch to the right Spanish station or the right Egyptian language or whatever, and you can communicate back and forth. And so hopefully this is where technology is taking it. Hopefully it brings us closer and closer together, not farther and farther apart, like some might say.
It's in a way about the law of unintended consequences. There have been studies done actually on niche marketing on TV.
Sorry about that.
That's the law of unintended consequences right there.
And that's the technology. We push the button and...
Well, anyway, concerning this niche marketing, for example, in the TV market, right? I mean, the idea was also that, hey, whatever, 30, 40 years ago or so, everybody was watching the same kind of programs, and then sort of niche marketing became the big thing. So then you started making programs for 18-year-olds and programs for 36-year-olds and so on and so forth. And then, well, yes, on the one hand, one could say, well, that created more programming diversity. On the other hand, it ended up actually dividing TV audiences where people were only watching what they were comfortable with and they weren't watching the other. And with news programming, of course, it's exactly the same thing. It's the very thing you suggested. And then people tend to then watch what they already think to be true, and generally they will not watch anything else or try to inform themselves on opposing viewpoints. So, but that's exactly what I meant earlier, when sometimes one doesn't know exactly how something will play out until it's actually in place, so we can make very optimistic assessments of this, but it's not necessarily how it's going to play out.
We have another question in that corner, Laura.
A few months ago, there was a news report, and I don't know if anybody up there could elaborate on this, that our standard internet, its program that's used internationally, is being challenged by China and also by Russia. And I'm wondering if anybody's familiar with that little silent war that's going on. No?
Yeah, it's big. Peter probably knows as much about this as...
you do.
I know I've been... I guess it was a month or so ago, I was at a secure IT conference. It certainly is true. It certainly is true that security, our cyber structure, is being challenged by other countries, and we play the same game. See, if I tell you this, they'll kill me. Just some of what and I don't want to make anybody paranoid. It's simply true that sometimes we have power outages and sometimes it's not really a power outage.
Please,
Today.
I wish we'd have a power outage. I'm a student and I have a test to take in 3 minutes, and it's 30% of my grade, so I'm going to excuse myself. Thank you. But I'd like to leave you with 3 things. Number one, in answer to your question, Pitney Bowes makes a machine that listens to every single word of every single phone call in the United States. This is not conspiracy theory, it's truth. If there are certain patterns of words, there's 1,600 that it listens for. It has an automatic court order to track the call from where it comes from and where it goes. If you were to use the word nuclear device, package, 26.6 kiloton, things like that, it listens. It does not listen to anything that Bobby broke up with Mary or anything along those lines, but it listens for certain word patterns, and it will trace you and it will track you, and it's very effective. But the one thing I wanted to end with on technology, we have a product that manages warehouses, and our beta test eliminated 1,400 jobs. We walked into a factory that had 2,500 people, and 6 days later, 1,400 people were let go. Now, is that good tech? Is that good tech? What I was saying is that our first software product that we just released, we walked into a warehouse that had 2,500 employees, and our software was so efficient, it eliminated 1,400 jobs. Now, is that good technology? We saved our customer millions of dollars, but we displaced thousands of workers. When is technology good and when is technology not good? And I'm the only one that sits up here, I think, from a business standpoint, and that we cannot legislate morality of technology, but we have to take it into consideration when we develop these products. And again, I'm not the brightest crayon up here by any means, and I've got to go to my math class, but I think I've learned more than I was able to share. But the way you spoke, sir, about technology being a negative, I thought you spoke very passionately. And I would have disagreed with you coming into this meeting, having all the answers, and I leave ready to reassess my position that there might be some morality in the technology itself. So anyway, with that, thank you. I have to go take a math class.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. And you know, the instructors, I don't think they bend anything. When the test comes, test comes. But we appreciate Mr. Williams that made the time for us and came for the time that he could. Okay, but we still continue with the questions.
With the rise in autism across the world, what technology is being created to help these autistic children or people communicate? That seems to be the problem. They're extremely intelligent and very computer-oriented, but they can't outwardly communicate. Is there anything on the horizon for them?
For a very long time, there's been computerized communication devices, and of course now they're much more sophisticated than ever before, and they are very simple in their look and the use of them, so that the student can either touch the picture or spell it out. Most of the time, though, I would say, for someone, depending on their level of ability, they may have just a picture symbol system. And there are a number of markets that have this product, but underneath, the parents can help by adding more than just mom. It can say, Mom, I want a drink of water. Mom, will you read me a story? So they can build their vocabulary simply by touching one or two pictures to build sentences. So there's that type of technology that's out there now. Yeah.
Thank you. Please.
This is on. A lot of the questions have addressed education. With technology, we can now manipulate atoms. We can see 13 billion years into the past. Those are high-end uses of technology. Hopefully, we're going to be able to create little nanobots that are going to go into the body and attach themselves to cancer cells and remove the cancer and not hurt anything else. So when it's a morally, if it's coming from a place where it's for the good of mankind, one way or another, the technology is perfect. There's nothing like technology, and it's accelerating like crazy. Now they have computer chips that are going 1,000 times faster than they thought they had reached their limit. And that knowledge is going to bring us to something else. So in terms of what's happening now, I think we also have to think, where is it going to be in a year or 5 years or 10 years? It's not just where it is now. It's just something to think about, that's all.
Well, there's a campus explorations, and I think there's a week or two when I'll talk about that. But it's this preview. You're exactly right. And actually, in most of the literature, the focus is on 3 specific technologies. which are GNR. And the folks who work for me think I'm talking about Guns N' Roses, but it's the G is genetics, the N is nanotechnology, as you were referring to, and the R is robotics, which includes, of course, computers. But the whole notion that, well, actually, I don't want to go too far into that, but I'll tell you, this has been a debate for some time. It actually started about 5 years ago in Wired magazine when Bill Joy wrote an article called Does the Future Need Us? And Bill Joy was the CEO of Sun Microsystems, and he was really most afraid of where he thought technology might go, particularly in the area of nanotechnology, because of the possibility of, if we start messing around with atoms and create a gray goo, everybody saw the blob at some point, I suppose. But he was quite serious about that. And the counter article came from Ray Kurzweil, who is, I'm sure, one of Sherry's heroes, certainly one of mine, but a true technologist who says this stuff is going to change us, yes, and it's going to change us for the better. It still is a raging debate, and it's a scary one and a serious one, and more than likely, there are folks in this room who will benefit or suffer from those technologies.
The connections I had with that is there's a movie called Gattaca, some of you may have seen it, and it's very interesting, but the things that they were talking about in that movie are really basically a reality today, and one of them had to do with genetic counseling, and in this one scene in the movie, the couple comes in to meet with the genetic counselor, and he tells them that, well, we've got this embryo that was, we had the husband's sperm and the woman's egg and put them together, and we've got this embryo. And he just sort of matter-of-factly says that we've taken the liberty of genetically screening out for, and he went through about like 10 different things, predisposition for alcoholism, schizophrenia, male pattern baldness, this on and on and on. And they were looking at him and they said, well, we kind of wanted to just see what happened without that. And he was shocked. And he said, well, why wouldn't you want to have the most perfect child you could? It's still your genes. It's just the best of all of your genes. If you had a child that was going to, be born with a broken leg or something, you would correct that, wouldn't you? Well, yeah, I'd correct that. But that kind of look at the future is really in the near future. That whole genetic counseling and genetic manipulation is something that is pretty close. Yep. People are having you talk about morality and technology. That's going to be a big issue.
Okay, we have another question again back there.
Yeah, I have another question about, and it deals exactly what we're talking about, morality and technology. And the question is, I'm a soldier in the United States Army, and I've also seen technology transform an industry, which is mine, soldiering. And we are way more efficient today at killing people than we were earlier in time, and it's due to technology. And the other part is, the United States has just gone through a big whoop-to-do about unwarranted wiretaps and technology being used to invade the privacy of citizens. Is technology truly neutral if it has its ability to do things like that? So, I
guess the analogy I used earlier was fire. If fire is neutral, you can cook food with fire, and you can warm yourself with fire, or you can put fire on the end of an arrow and shoot it off and burn down whole villages with it. And so again, it goes back to the morality of it. What are you going to do with the technology once you get it? And maybe that's something that needs to be taught in the families and the churches and in our society so that we make the right choices. And if we don't teach that morality, then those choices won't be made. Then it is going to be a scary world instead of a brave new world.
Well, technology might not have a morality, but I still don't believe it's neutral. And the car, take the car for example. The car is not a neutral technology. The car has transformed America. There would be no suburbs without cars. The whole culture of America, which has then be transformed by its suburbanization, that would be different. And so there's nothing neutral about this at all. Now, is it good or bad? Now that's another question, you know. But it's not neutral. I mean, technology is often transformative, often radically transformative. You know? Well, in your particular example, of course, the neutrality, there was never any neutrality intended even. I mean, as you said, you know, weapons are made to kill. That's what they're designed to do. Then one can still argue, well, you know, do a kill for good or bad purposes, if there is such a thing, you know, either way. But it's not neutral, you know.
Do you have another comment?
I was just going to make a quick comment about the military. I mean, a lot of very interesting studies are going on, and one of the products that's being developed is a helmet with, you know, computerized equipment and voice synthesizers and so on in it. And the idea is that a person would be able to put on that helmet and be able to communicate with anybody in any language. I mean, that would be something that would be, it seems like a real unifying influence of technology.
Thank you. We have another question right there. Yes, okay.
Hello. Oh, my comment was regarding about the military. That was the first time I ever heard that, and my question is, you're saying it's moral and it's kind of like a double-edged sword, basically, what you're saying. How does that affect us as the younger generation, since I'm in the younger generation? How are we going to change technology for the better if the government is just basically throwing out our Bill of Rights and doing that to the people? How are we supposed to change that as a group and change technology for the better for our society if the government and the media isn't allowing that? How do you guys view that? If there's a lot of, you know, as you're saying, yeah, we have blackouts, but they're not really blackouts. What is that about? I don't know if you get what I'm saying. Like, you're saying it's moral, but it's really a double-edged sword. The government's lying to us, and technology is actually being really negative to the next generation. So how are we supposed to change that for the better, so it, you know, it's better for everybody? Or should I just wait for the next the next time to talk about it?
Neil Postman has said that, I mean, the adoption of every technology, there are winners and there are losers. The difficult thing sometimes is knowing ahead of time who exactly the winners and the losers are going to be, you know, or how to mitigate the results of the technology or the impact of the technology. You know, frankly, I mean, sometimes nobody knows ahead of time, including the government. You know, at other times, of course, we sometimes made promises regarding the impact of a certain technology that, if one thinks about it in a clear way, they're simply not true. You know, think, for example, I mean, let's think of, well, TV maybe again, right? I mean, when cable came along, right, what we were promised was this enormous variety of educational programming and all the wonderful things that TV was going to do, right? Well, what came instead was like a huge garbage chute, you know, that, you know, of stupid game shows and like an endless amount of reality shows, and any educational programming was completely marginalized, right? And also all that open access to the airwaves that both radio and TV were always promising has never materialized, you know. But the funny thing is, even when it does materialize, nobody watches it, right? Because we'd rather be watching a reality show. Now, to that extent, then, that is really our choice. I mean, that's our own fault if we do that, right? But at the same time, those promises were pie in the sky to begin with. I mean, that was easily predictable, actually, how that really was going to. And I think now with some technologies, for example, well, even military technology, I mean, sometimes there's morality can be in the foreground. I mean, let's think of shells that were made with depleted uranium. So, I mean, there's nothing neutral about that. And, you know, what was going to happen was very predictable, right? In that case, it's not outright lies. How does one prevent something like that? Well, more democracy.
Well, you're talking to a guy who runs a couple of educational TV programs or stations. So. And actually, we were thinking about putting this on the air. So, you know, hopefully somebody will decide to watch it. So we'd hope anyway. No, it's true. I mean, but that's another example. I mean, people have choices. That's a good thing. You know, when I was a kid in Detroit, you know, and that was a big city, and we had a market of all of 2 stations, you know, to choose from. And the programming was Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best, I think. You know, now we've got a few other choices, and I think that's a good thing. Unfortunately, people don't always make the right choices, or the choices that make them smarter, but it makes them more comfortable. That's not a fault of the media, and those of us who are involved actually in trying to develop educational content and expanding the knowledge and the opportunities that are available to students, you know, are able to use this technology for the benefit of those who, you know, can apply it. And that includes the instructors in our great system.
And I agree with that too, is that it's choices. And I was laughing with some other people. I said, do you remember when television used to go off? You know, at midnight you get that signal, you hear the national anthem, like boop, nothing on TV.
Yeah.
You know, now it's 24/7, you know, it's on all the time. And you have choices, you know, you have the Discovery Channel, you have PBS, you have other channels, you can watch the History Channel. If you have cable, you can get all those channels. But if you want to watch the American Idol or something else, that's your choice too. But in the end, I still bring it back to a morality thing. It's like, if the world isn't the way you like it, why are you allowing it to happen? You know? So we all as individuals, we have that choice to choose our leaders, to choose the people to run the governments, to choose. And if we choose not to do that, then that's a choice too. We chose not to do it.
Thank you. We have a question right in the back there.
Hi, I've had about 17 questions running through my head as we've been going through, and I guess what I've landed on after being attending about 10 or 12 of the campus exploration seminars, or maybe less than that, but I've been to most of them, and coming through, I'm going to use a word to answer the question, is it a friend or an enemy, that my students would probably be very familiar with, and that's, it's a frenemy. A frenemy is, this is a teenage word, this is something that you hang around with and you use and you're around, but you don't quite trust it. That there's something enemy-ish about this friendship. And you see it as an instructor. You see it very often. You see your students panicking because the internet is down and so they can't print their papers that are due that day. And if you're like me and don't take late papers, you know how that works. So you see it as an instructor when you plan to do that. I'm going to teach you about how to use the library's databases, and they're not available. And so what do? I think when you're really looking at the reliance on technology and seeing it as something as it's always going to be there, or it's a good thing, what we always need to keep in mind is that it's a tool, ultimately. And so I guess I don't know if I really have a question at this point. They've all seemed to have evaporated. But I guess what I'm really most concerned about is, does an over-reliance of technology limit the way we are able to adapt to things as much as maybe it, on the other hand, helps us to adapt to things?
Thank you. We are toward the end of our program.
That is a
Any
really
questions?
wonderful remark, actually. But in a way, that's exactly the kind of thinking about technology that we need more of, you know, like that stepping really outside the box that technology is creating and thinking, you know, how it impacts us, you know, which is very difficult. You know, that's very difficult because, you know, once one is in a computer world, one tends to think in computer ways about it. You know, once one is in a texting world, one tends to think in texting ways about it. And it's very difficult to think it's a hand examining the hand then. It doesn't work, right? But yes, Of course, I mean, technology does sometimes prevent us from adapting, and particularly large-scale technology, particularly to the computer for that matter. I mean, once an institution is computerized, nobody ever questions it, you know, because it seems to have an aura of invincibility and objectivity that it before just didn't have. You know, if the computer says so, it must be true. You know, if it's online, well, then it's simply online and you have to deal with it. There's no other way of dealing with it anymore. And to that extent, I mean, many social critics have said that, I mean, heavy investment in technology tends to prefer the status quo, you know, to that extent, because people, for the average citizen, it's very difficult to go behind the technology and ever ask, well, why was it programmed in exactly this way? Why wasn't it programmed in that way? And whom does this kind of programming favor? You know, it's very hard to do, but I think we need to do it.
Okay, this is toward the end of our program. We can take one more question. Is there any question in the audience? With these lights, I can't see everyone. If you don't have any more questions, I will share with you two quotations. About 31 years ago, 1977, Ken Olson, president of Digital Equipment Corporation, at the convention of the World Future Society in Boston, said, "There is no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home." And about 19 years after that, 1996, President Clinton, during announcement of Next Generation Internet Initiative, said, "When I took office, only high-energy physicists had ever heard of what is called the World Wide Web. Not even my cat has its own page." I would like to acknowledge the presence of our governing board member, Nancy Chadwick, and also to thank you, our president, Robert Deegan, our keynote speaker, Haydn Davis, our panelists, Alonzo Coleman, Sherry Goldsmith, Martin Japtok, Blaine Morrow, and Peter Williams. And this is my 4th year doing this, and I have to leave you with one more quotations. I am crazy about these quotations, and I think this is nice and you would like this. This quotation is from Frank Borman. He was the commander of the Apollo 8. In December 1968, he said, "When you are finally up the moon, looking back at the Earth, all these differences and nationalistic traits are pretty well going to blend, and you are going to get a concept that maybe this is really one world, and why can't we learn to live together?" And thank you so much for attending, and have a wonderful evening.